In this video, we're going to take a look at Montblanc's Beatles Psychodelic Purple. So let's jump straight to the end with what I think about this ink. A good true purple for me. Unfortunately, it's gone from the market now by the time I got to this review. It gives decent overall shading and a lot of color variation depending on the flow of the nib that you put it into. I find it's not the Joker purple that I tend to go to, but after first trying it, I had to fight the urges to use it until I got around to this review. Now I get to devour this ink. Joy to the world. I know that's not the Beatles song, but man, I enjoyed using this ink. Since actually doing the writing samples, I've gone through another couple of fills. Frequently, when I use the pens for the writing sample, I put that ink back into whatever vessel it came from. And in this particular case, I went out using all four of those pens just to use this ink. It makes you want to write just a little bit more than normal, which is always a good thing. I do wish that some of these inks that Montblanc has had that are very popular and out there would come back, because some of them are just so fantastic, it's a shame to leave it as limited. Bring it back. This one is absolutely loved for a reason. So well behaved, easy to clean out of the pen, and amazing to look at on the page. I wish I could get spare bottles of it. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Lamy 2000 with a medium nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Here we see a tremendous amount of tone variation depending on the pen we're using. Now, the thing that most stood out to me is it shades really nicely on that on that soft fine with the 3776. When it came to the medium, the tone got quite a bit darker, but the pen itself is also a bit wetter. The broad sig. Why am I having trouble with words? It did about the same tone, just a little bit darker than the medium. Now, in no case did we ever deal with any kind of feathering or spread. It performed very well. It looks great on the page. We also see what we would expect, that there's no bleeding and no ghosting. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Platinum 3776 with a soft fine nib, a Pilot E95S with a medium nib, a Franklin Christoph Model 66 with a broad sig nib. The next writing sample is done on Leuchtterm 1917 paper. Here we get the same amount of different tone variation depending on the pen that we got with the previous paper. It is interesting that the medium looks a little bit darker than that broad sig did. Now, we also had no feathering, we had no spreading. We did get some decent shading in the soft fine. There's spots of shading, just some spots that are a little bit darker on the medium. The broad sig, we didn't have any shading at all there. Now, we get no feathering as any kind of an issue. We get no spread as any kind of an issue. Really great performance here. A noticeable thing to me is that on this particular paper, the medium and the broad sig get kind of a dusty tone with them. While we got no bleed through, we did get quite a bit of ghosting, and this ghosting might stop some people from using the back of the page. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done on Moleskine paper. While I'm only at the beginning of this notebook, its paper has really been impressing me to the point that I've considered picking up more because I think they've improved their quality a lot. We see the performance here is really in line with what went on with the Leuchtterm. The extra fine has no feathering, no spread. It does have some nice spots of shading that really show up, especially in the downstroke. The medium is a lot darker than the soft fine. It gets that dusty tone, just like the Leuchtterm, and it makes me think it's got to do with the tone of this particular paper. Not much for shading, more quality from this paper than anything else. Now, the broad sig, it had no feathering, it had no spread. It is a bit lighter in tone than the medium, but it looks good. We have no shading there. The purple itself looks very nice on this paper. And once again, despite all of the bad press that Moleskines had for a very long time, we have some minor ghosting and no bleeding. It didn't touch this page underneath at all. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a composition notebook. While looking at these inks, what we see here is that all of their tones are going to be noticeably lighter than what's occurred on the other paper. Now, the extra fine, the soft fine, it still offers little bits of shading, although it is quite a bit lighter than we've gotten with some other papers. The medium is a lot darker than the soft fine, but not as dark as it has been. This purple is really an interesting purple on this particular paper. It's not the same tone that we got on the other papers. We're not getting any shading on the medium. We don't get any kind of feathering. We don't get any kind of spread. The same happens with the broad sig. Just a straightforward performance. No feather, no spread, no shading, solid tone. The shading came with the soft fine. So it's a matter of what you want being choosing the right pen and sometimes the right paper. As has been the case with this paper, we do get some minor ghosting that's going on, but we get absolutely no bleed. It never touched the page underneath. Always a win with this notebook. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diamine Tyrian Purple. Here is Pilot Japanese Beautyberry. Here is Private Reserve Purple Haze. Here is Schaefer Purple. The next writing sample is done in a Mead 5-star notebook. Here's a paper that always has remarkably bad performance, but the performance here's a bit all over the board. When looking at the soft fine, we get no feather, we get no spread. We do get some spots of shading, not as much shading as we've gotten with any of the papers before, but this is much more absorbent. It still gives a very nice, clean tone. I don't know how else to describe that with the soft fine. With the medium, it is much darker than the soft fine. It has a little bit of spread, only a little bit. It's the tiniest bit. No feathering, which I was a bit surprised there. Really nice, a decent tone. Now, on the broad sig, we experience some feathering. The feathering that occurs is very tiny. Like if you look at the H on branch, you do see that there's some feathering. You look at the end of the word mathematics, there's a little bit of feathering. But I see it as very acceptable given the quality of this paper. So while there is some spread that does occur and there's tiny featherings on the broad sig, I don't see this as being something that should get in your way from using this notebook with this ink. Something else that this notebook did very well is while it's got a ton of ghosting and it's got spots that look like it's going to come through, it never touched the page underneath. So it never actually bled through, ruining the next page, leaving this in good standing for me for a student to use. While it's nice to find other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a green ink by Jane Muir Vert Olive. Here is a green ink by KWZ Green Number 2. Here is a brown ink by Robert Oster Gold Antiqua. Here is an orange ink by Califolio Their Inti. If you'd prefer different complement colors, then there's links to those different playlists down in the description. Or you can click on my face. That'll take you to my channel page. Then click on the playlist tab. Scrolling down, you'll be able to see all of the playlists that are here on the channel. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Never a good performer. The paper always has issues. Even the soft fine is experiencing a little bit of spread. Some feathering that goes on when you look at the end of the word relationships. Woo, couldn't read. I had a brain fart there. You look at the word relationships, you look at the word the, you see it in simple, you see tiny featherings all over. It gives it the slight blurry look to it. I still don't see this stopping you if this is what you have to use. I do think it's a shame to use this ink on this paper. Now, when it came to the medium, there was an extreme amount of spread, which is normal here. There's feathering, but it's all tiny feathering, but it's fairly consistent also, adding to its amazing amount of spread. No shade. It's honestly here, it's just purple. It loses what's nice about this ink. On the broad sig, it's like the medium, other than that the writing is a bit different for being a sig nib, but the spread largely eats up any of the character that nib would give it. And it still feathers quite a bit, and some of that feathering causes some of the letters to come together. Not a fan here. I think it wastes a great ink. When it comes to if this ink is going to have bleed or ghost, naturally it has an amazing amount of bleeding heavy into the page. Very amazing. Only 3 spots did it have where it touched the page underneath. So not horrible, but you know you're not using the back of the page with this because you wouldn't be able to read either side once you wrote on both sides. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This is a tough one because when it comes to choosing the nib and pen with this, I like it with the dry fine for its gentle tone, and I like the way it shades with that. I also like the bold, darker tone that you can get from that wet medium nib. Ultimately, I see this ink as dealer's choice. Put it in any pen that's going to make you happy. Just choose good paper. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you want to be able to follow me over on Instagram, I'm there as an ink guy. Thanks for watching.